All right. Thank you everyone for joining who's on the chat. We are going to keep you guys muted. And if you can, please go ahead and send in your questions for Bill and Jamie in the chat. And we will reserve that after their presentation. As we have been advertising in the members group and on our page, we have Bill Young from Mold and More Decon with us, and Jamie Moments, hopefully I pronounced that correctly, from Intelagard. And we are going to talk about their Intelagard's Easy Decon DF200 solution and how you guys can use it to help you through your mold issues. And then again, we'll answer any questions that you guys have. So feel free to send your questions in the chat at any time. Now I'm going to pass the mic over to either Jamie or Bill, whoever wants to start.
Thanks, Bill. I'll start with the background and Bill can get into the nitty gritty of the remediation side. So Easy Decon was originally developed for the United States military to kill and neutralize weapons of mass destruction. So if you look at Bacillus anthracis, which is anthrax, it's both naturally occurring and you can use it as a chemical weapon. So back a little over 20 some odd years ago, it was in the early 90s, that the military decided to, if there was going to be an attack on our country, they needed some way to decontaminate that. And so Sandia National Labs actually created the formula for the United States military. Sandia National Labs, since it is a federal agency, they're not allowed to resell the products that they make. So when they developed this formula, they went out and they were looking for some way to deploy it that wouldn't harm the soldier. And at the time, we were building systems that would create a beautiful foam, delivery systems that would change liquid into foams. And so what happened is they found us because we create the perfect bubble structure for foam. Bubbles aren't actually circles, they're hexagons, and that's important in this arena for VOC suppression. And so we were chosen as the applicator of choice for this decontamination formula. So then what happened is we acquired the license to it, and now we offer a decontamination system and a decontamination solution. So over the years, outside of the military, it's one of the most widely tested products on the market. I pretty much Google it weekly to find out who else is testing it and what more research that's being released on it. It takes about 20 years before the government will release data. And what we're finding out is with the foam application, foam can absorb into porous materials, which makes it much more effective at removing mold or chemical weapons, whichever the case may be. And you can deploy it in many different ways. So like we were talking earlier, you can use it in your wash machine for cleaning out clothing. You can deploy it as a fog to knock down mycotoxins and things that are lingering in the air. After you have a water leak and you fix the source of the leak, you can deploy it as a foam to remove any mold that may have been growing in that area. So there's many different applications, there's many different industries. So we've branched out from just the military, working with mold remediation companies, working with DOs and health professionals who have patients that are suffering from mold and mycotoxin issues, just to get our motto is infection prevention and control. And so that's really what we're focused on.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that, Jamie. We're in the progress of developing a product for maybe wiping down surfaces. When I think of wipes, I almost think of something similar to like a Clorox wipe where you just pull out of a box and you're able to just clean something really quickly. Is this something that's in development for Intelagard?
So not currently at this time. Probably what I was talking about is that most people are using cleaning wipes. They're not reading that. They're not reading the package. And there's something called dwell time that you need to factor in there. So a Lysol wipe, for example, you're not supposed to just wipe a surface. You're supposed to pull it out, let it sit on the surface for whatever that dwell time may be. But people don't read the fine print and they don't understand that. So they just do what comes natural, and that's what those companies are banking on.
That was something that was interesting that Bill had pointed out. It was the dwell time of products. Like you have to allow these products to sit in order for them to be fully effective at decontaminating or neutralizing whatever is on a surface. Can you maybe describe more of what dwell time means?
So dwell time is the amount of time the product has to remain on the surface in order to kill or neutralize the pathogen. So the standard out of the box EPA regulation is 10 minutes. And if you check 10 minutes, if you want anything less than that, you have to pay more to the EPA to validate that. So we have a standard 10-minute dwell time, which in the mold arena, that's probably pretty accurate, if not a little bit longer, depending on the severity of mold and what types of mold you're up against. And that's something that Bill could probably answer a little bit better than I could. But yeah, dwell time is important because it takes time for these products to work. So if you're literally just wiping off a surface and throwing it away, you haven't given it ample opportunity. You have to break through the biofilm, you have to break through the lipid layer. You're just not giving it enough time to react.
And if you're dealing with something that's spored, and there are sporing bacteria, and of course there's mold spores, it takes time to penetrate that protein coating. Think of an M&M and hard coating on the outside so that it doesn't melt in your hand. And so what you've got to do is you've got to leave this product on there long enough, keep it moist long enough for it to actually break down that resistance on whatever the coating is. In the case of either bacteria or fungi, you've got a protein coating on there, not a candy coating. And it takes quite a bit for something to penetrate that. Once that coating is reduced, and that's why we have the surfactant side of Easy Decon, because the surfactant is what breaks down that surface tension. And you need to break down the surface tension sufficiently so that the hydrogen peroxide and the diacetyl can do what it needs to do on the inside and take care of the biological. With viruses, it's something that doesn't generally take all that long because they really are only dealing with a lipid layer. It's a layer of fat. They don't have a hard coating on the outside of the virus. It's simply waiting for it to combine with your DNA to create the problems that it creates. In and of itself, it's not alive. It's RNA that combines with your DNA, and that's when you start to react to it. And if you just wipe things down, which is what we saw during COVID, where I'd go to the grocery store and I'd watch them outside, some poor schlub got saddled with wiping off carts or little baskets, and they're wiping it with the wipe. They might even be spraying something on there, but all they really did was move the bad stuff from one side of it to the other because it wasn't on there long enough to do any damage. And that's the critical piece. And that's really one of the problems, like in hospitals. Why do we have hospital infections that build up resistance? It's because they didn't do an adequate job of disinfecting. And part of that is because we expect everything. We sacrifice efficacy on the altar of efficiency. So if it can be done quickly, then that makes us happy. And if we can feel like it was done quickly, even if it wasn't, we're even happier.
I can add to that is the CDC, a way to explain it is the CDC says we have to clean and disinfect, right, in general terms. And so a lot of products out there, a lot of mildewstats, a lot of fungicides, they're on the disinfecting side, but they don't have a cleaning agent. So they're relying on you to clean first. So the Easy Decon is a 3-part solution. So in a kit, you get 3 bottles. The first one is the soap, is the surfactant. That is what's doing the cleaning for you. And then part 2 and part 3 are working together, and that's where your disinfection comes in. So we are a little bit faster, as Bill was referring to, because we're doing 2 steps in one product. And that's something that a lot of folks don't understand is, yes, I have this great disinfectant, why doesn't it work? And actually, during the COVID years, there were studies that came out about disinfectants that they weren't working at all on COVID, which should be relatively easy to kill because it is a virus with only a lipid layer. And it wasn't working. Those disinfectants were being repelled from it because it had this biofilm around it protecting it. And you can't get through that with a disinfectant on its own. You need a cleaner as well.
Thank you for mentioning that. I wanted to bring that up because that was something that Bill had mentioned during our interview that really blew my mind, that a lot of these proprietary cleaners that people are using that you can buy in a supermarket are doing nothing but building up biofilms.
Mhm.
And over time, how do those biofilms affect our health? Do you guys have any of that information? If they're sitting on the surface and collecting, like what does that do to our environment?
Well, just think of a biofilm, just think about plaque on your teeth. So you have to go into the dentist and have some of that plaque actually scraped off. And what the biofilm does is it provides a temporary housing unit for whatever the pathogen is. And if the environment happens to be unfriendly for whatever that pathogen is, then the biofilm will allow it to survive longer until it can adapt or grow enough for it to be a problem with you. And biofilms can be a problem even with disinfection processes. So phenolics in particular, which would include Lysol, for example, that's a phenolic disinfectant. It's great on bacteria and viruses, but it does tend to build up a biofilm on the surface of whatever it was that it cleaned. If you use it regularly and you don't rinse adequately and things like that, you can end up with a biofilm that is actually your disinfectant. And then it could potentially build up a resistance.
Wow, thank you for that. Another question that comes to mind for me is, how does Easy Decon DF200 differ from other products on the market? For example, there's a major product being marketed to the mold community that is effective at cleaning it, neutralizing it, or other products that are more natural, more botanical. How does that differ?
So I'll start, Bill. I would educate folks on log kill, and that's probably the quickest way to determine a little bit more the integrity of the product. So for those that don't know, products have a log kill rating. Disinfectants, all EPA regulated products have a log kill rating. And so log kill, there's products out there, and you've seen the commercials that say, I'm 99% effective. Gee whiz, that's almost 100, great. But in the log kill world, that's far from 100. Log kill disinfectants can go up to a 7 log kill. So a product can be 99.99999% effective. And the difference is how many microbes you're leaving behind on the surface. So a 3 log kill product, which is generally something you can buy at the grocery store, they're leaving behind 10,000 microbes on that surface. So again, going back to creating biofilms, creating superbugs, you're leaving so much contamination still there. A 99 with a 7 log kill, which is our product, that says legally I have to tell you we leave behind 1 microbe. There are testing results that show we leave 0, but log kill is very important, and people don't want to tell you that. People don't advertise that because in the general community, 99.9 sounds awesome until you learn more about that and how that actually works. So that would be the first thing I would recommend to folks when they're looking at a product, is to find that out and see what it's really doing. And then we go back to being able to clean and disinfect in one product. So is that product just a true disinfectant, or is it a cleaner as well? You know, you want a well-rounded application. So those are 2 of the things that I would point out. I'm sure Bill would point out different things in the remediation world. Bill?
Well, the other thing that you need to look at is not just the log kill and all that, but you got to deal with, especially with mold, you have to deal with what's the moisture source. The structural elements that are involved, what are the materials? We know that drywall comes with mold spores embedded in it when they make it. And in fact, that's one of the reasons that Stachybotrys shows up so quickly after a flood or a hurricane, because the mold spores are already there, they're prepped. Then it's just add water. And that's why it shows up. Usually takes Stachybotrys anywhere between 72 and 96 hours for it to actually start to amplify. And yet after a hurricane comes through in Florida, you'll see black mold on the drywall in people's homes within 48 hours. And it's because the mold spores are already there. They don't have to float in and land on the surface. All you have to do is add the water. And the paper is its favorite food source, because really to pull the cellulose out of that paper, which is what it needs to do, convert that to sugars so that it can feed its kids, it's partially processed for it. So paper is a particularly vulnerable product for that. Cardboard is the same way. It's processed wood products. And as a result, it's real easy for the mold to convert that to a viable food source. So those are all factors that have to be considered. If you've got a mold issue, you got to figure out where the moisture is coming from. If you start seeing crickets show up in the lower areas of your house, you've got a moisture issue. There's a host of factors to look for, and then consider relative humidity as a potential problem. We often think of moisture only in terms of snow, water, and ice, but no, the moisture can be in the form of high relative humidity. That's one of the problems in Pennsylvania. We have super high relative humidity, just like Florida, but we don't have nice beaches to go along with it. And so it's problematic because we have basements in our houses, which is below grade. That's already going to be cooler and more moist simply because of the way that it's built. Depending on how your foundation is structured, if it's block, then that's very porous. We have some in the inner city Philadelphia where it's actually brick from colonial days. And that's super porous. We have a lot of older homes in what's called the Philadelphia Main Line that have stone rubble foundations. So they've just taken rock from the area and piled it together and put some mortar between it. That's real porous. So you end up with moisture loads, and it's really the moisture that's the problem. So those are all things in terms of remediation that you have to consider.
Fantastic. I just want to send a friendly reminder to those that are listening that have joined a little bit later. Please send in your questions as we're going through the presentation, and we will have Bill and Jamie answer them to the best of their ability. Thank you both so much. Now, I have a question where I know that we're all really concerned about the environment, especially us moldies who've been made hypersensitive, like to call us moldies. We're always concerned about our environments. Does Easy Decon create treatment resistant microbes in the environment?
It really doesn't, because it's an oxidizer. Because of the fact that it's using hydrogen peroxide and the diacetyl, it doesn't allow for bugs to gain resistance to it. It's so highly effective. And that's another reason to look for that 7-log kill. Although in most of the literature that you find, they never talk about a log kill, because as soon as you do that, people's eyes glaze over because it reminds them of 7th grade math class and they freak out. But the log kill is really important because we don't leave enough left behind for there to be a resistance, where other products, we will get resistance. And I want to mention, I'm not a fan of antimicrobials in paints or on surfaces. And we have a host of products that advertise that they have antimicrobials built into their product or into their paint. The problem with that is that all chemical antimicrobials have a half-life. At some point, they're not going to be effective. And now you have bacteria that what doesn't kill me makes me stronger. Next generation is going to be able to get away with it. And we also have to be very careful with things like fungi, because for them, the colony forming units can exchange nuclei. So if one colony forming unit is resistant and the neighboring colony forming unit is not, all they have to do is exchange nuclei. Everybody's resistant. And so we end up with a bigger potential problem down the road if we continue to use willy-nilly antimicrobials.
And on the oxidizing agent, so I'll go back to the Easy Decon is 3 components, 3 separate components. And when you mix them all together, so part one is organics, surfactants, soaps, everything you have in your home. Part two is peroxide. And then part three, as Bill mentioned, is the diacetyl. When you mix all three together, you're creating an oxidizer. And there's a oxidizing scale. It's called the redox value. We have the highest value on the market. So higher than peroxide by itself, higher than bleach by itself. So this oxidizing component is what's really working to take care of that load and that surface and works together on the log kill. They all kind of intermingle together to make the product successful.
So I'm assuming that what you can buy in the stores, they all don't have this similar log kill to what Easy Decon GF200 has.
That's correct. We're not intended for use. You'll never see us on Amazon or a grocery shelf because there's a little bit that goes with it. So we deal with professional remediation firms. We've been working with some of your clients, but there's been a lot of training that's gone with them, especially with moldies, as you call yourselves, because it's not a one size fits all. I mean, some folks have different reactions to different things, and we need to know that we're taking that into account and we're working with them. And if you just walk into a grocery store and buy that, you're not doing that. You're doing the product a disservice. So we really try to control that so that we can give the education that goes with the product.
Fantastic. Bill, can you maybe give us a few examples of how Easy Decon has been helpful in maybe hard to treat mold cases where a family has come to you, they had a remediation that failed, or a person's still sick and they're still trying to figure out what's going on in their home?
Yeah, I just had a call from one of our clients recently that we've been working with for probably about the last year. And they had a house that had a stucco failure, an exterior cladding failure, and the whole family was exposed to mold. So they're already working with a deficit. One of the members of the family had Lyme's disease, which adds to that deficit. And so they were living in a rental property, and unfortunately, the drain under the kitchen sink had a leak. It wasn't sealed properly. And after they moved into the house, they ended up with a leak under the sink, which then produced stachybotrys underneath the sink base in the kick plate area. So you've got this 3 to 4 inch gap underneath the cabinet where it's dark and moist and the water stays there for a long period of time. And it ended up with stachy growing in that space. They started reacting in the house that they were renting. I forget now how they actually got a hold of us, but they called. I went over, took a look at it. We discovered exactly what was going on with that kitchen sink base, but they were reacting in other parts of the house, and they had determined that the basement was probably problematic. But the basement was fully finished with drywalled ceilings. So there's no way you can see any of the structural elements to see if they had any past water intrusions or if during construction, the lumber had been exposed to moisture, and you end up, and it's not very unusual at all, to walk into new construction and find mold growth in new construction because it sits out in the rain, it sits out in the snow. The windows aren't in, the roof's not on as they're building the house. And carpenters get paid to drive nails, not pay attention to microbial growth. And so they end up with this basement situation. They're not sure what's going on. They're reacting every time they come in the house. I literally walk in their house in February. It's freezing cold outside. All their windows are open. They're running little electric heaters because they don't want to run the HVAC system. And when we get done, I take a look at it. I say, okay, well, you really need to run the HVAC system because you're not balancing your heat and cool, which means you're going to end up with condensation issues. Before we did the remediation, in preparation for that, I went over one weekend with a fogger, and they said, fog whatever you need to and just fog the air. Now, before I did that, she had actually done a Hertz me test. And she sent that out to the lab. She was aware that there was a specific species of Aspergillus mold that they reacted to very strongly, and that was present in their rental property. I came in, I fogged the space, nothing specific. I didn't wipe down any surfaces. I didn't do anything with the kitchen sink at that point because we were scheduled to come in and do that remediation at a later time. But what happened was when I got done with that, she actually did a subsequent Hertz me test, sent that out, and the specific species of Aspergillus mold that she was reacting to had disappeared. So the fogging alone took care of that. It didn't take care of the Stachybotrys, and it didn't eliminate their entire problem because we still had to do that remediation, and we also needed to clean and sanitize their HVAC system because there was some concern. There was a whole house humidifier on the unit that adds a lot of moisture to those spaces, and it was potentially problematic. So we needed to do that. But she's had such a positive response, and now they've asked us to come and look at the only house they've looked at in the last 6 months that they felt they didn't react to when they walked in to look at it. So that's one example. And plus we did he owns a traffic signal installation company. So they put in traffic signals around the country. And his office building had a problem which had generated Stachybotrys on the drywall in the entry foyer of the building. And it was mainly because when we get hit with a nor'easter, the rain comes out of the east and it gets driven up against surfaces, usually because of a higher wind. And it drove it right in through the windows and into the cavities in the exterior wall. And that's where the Stachybotrys came from. We've had several other clients who presented not only sensitivity to mold, but then because of their sensitivity, they were chemically sensitive. And so in general, with those folks, what we have to do is run negative air pressure for an extra 24 hours after we get done with the remediation, so that it removes any traces of whatever's left in the space. Because easy decon can irritate some people. If you're there and you're chemically sensitive, or frankly, if you take off your respirator too early, which I have done, it's a mucous membrane irritant because of the hydrogen peroxide. So you don't want to be in the space when you use it. You want to be able to separate those folks from that space. And one of the ways we do that is by applying the extra negative air.
Can this solution be used to clean the interior or exterior of a vehicle?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah. Yeah, we've had a number of clients whose trunk on their car, the gasket failed, and they ended up getting water in the trunk, which they didn't realize was there as they were driving the car. And then eventually they start to react while they're driving the car. Or in a lot of cars, the AC system will actually create a problem under the dashboard because of either condensation, because of the chilling factor of the AC, or we've actually had instances where mice have gotten in and nested in the cabin filter in the car, and you can end up getting a reaction to that.
Have you ever tested the air of like the indoor air of a vehicle? I'm just curious.
Yeah, actually, we did an air test because somebody was concerned. So we turned on the AC system, put it on recirculate, and did a 2-minute spore trap sample in the inside the car, and it came back elevated levels of penicillium and Aspergillus.
Any Stachy ever found in a vehicle?
I've had Stachy found in the vehicle. Usually, if it was in the trunk where you had a lot where water collected, and you had something stored in the trunk, maybe the cardboard box that contained your kids' workout gear or something, and they didn't move the box. Very often with Stachy, what we find is we don't find it in the air until somebody moves something, and then it aerosols. Otherwise, it's too wet and sticky. Very seldom. That's one we very seldom find. The other one that I have never found in an air sample is Wellemia sevi, which also is an inflammatory agent. And that one I've found in every single ERMI or HERTSMI test that I've done, but I have not found it in an air sample anywhere.
So you have to agitate the environment in order to find.
Yeah, something has to stir it up. It's the spores must be too big and heavy. And I'm sure there are times when it's airborne, because when I'm doing dust samples, I'm doing dust samples from elevated areas. So at some point it gets in the air. I just have never had it show up in a spore trap sample.
Got it. Thank you so much. I'm going to head over to our chat box here, and I'm going to ask the questions of those who are tuning in and want to know more. So we have a question here. Will fogging a space remove the mycotoxins in the air? So I'm assuming fogging with Easy Decon.
That's a difficult question to answer, because there's a lot of physical factors that we'd probably have to take a look at. But the one thing I can say is that the toxin is almost always going to be connected with either a branch of hypha or with the spore, because the only time they can produce the toxin is when they have an ideal environment, and they're really sloppy painters. So everything in the colony gets coated with the toxin. And because the branching pieces, the hypha, and the spores are negatively charged, then it potentially could take it right out of the air on those items, simply because Easy Decon is a cationic substance. It's positively charged. And so it will attract whatever pathogens are in the air. And that includes bacteria and viruses, because almost all of them are negatively charged. And the positive charge will attract them and then bring them together. And when you bring them together, then the product has an opportunity to accomplish the task of either destroying the pathogen and or breaking down the mycotoxin because of its chemical weapon capability. It can break the chemical bonds.
That is a tricky question, because every mold situation is different, but we do work, we're based out of Denver, and we do work with some whole health doctors here, where once wherever the moisture is coming from and that part of the issue has been solved, where they will go in and do fogs once a month for those clients, just to knock down what is in the air, whether that's mycotoxins or viruses or whatever. And they're seeing a lot of relief from that, being able to sleep 8 hours or not being as congested, or, you know, everybody's response is different. But again, it is a case by case, depending on what's going on in that structure.
That was something that Keely had mentioned when she first used the Easy Decon solution, that she was okay with it. It sort of irritated her husband, but after she used it in her laundry, the entire house, like her family, reported that things felt better. Their clothing felt better. They were able to sleep better. Like her son is very sensitive. He was able to actually sleep in his bed undisturbed. So that is definitely something that Keely had reported. Keely's now dealing with mold growth in her windows. So nothing is really helping at this point, but she's still using Easy Decon to take a little bit of the edge off of her thing that's getting contaminated. She's able to fix the windows. I think she's waiting for them to come in. Anyways, are there certain fabrics that it does not work for? I also did do better for a while, but want to know the time limit for this to work on floors. And this individual did purchase the Easy Decon solution. She has that.
So when we talk about, we'll start with fabrics and laundry. I always tell folks, again, it's a 3-part solution. So it's a 1/4 cup of part 1, a 1/4 cup of part 2, and a 1/4 teaspoon of part 3. Mix it together in a measuring cup and pour it straight into your soap dispenser. That's the baseline, right? So depending on your sensitivity and what you've been exposed to, that may or may not work for you. You may need to test it a little bit and maybe use a little bit more product next time. just keeping in mind that the ratio is 49%, 49%, and 2% is how you mix. So I wouldn't get, me personally, because it is being diluted in your washing machine, and technically we tell you not to dilute the product for highest efficacy. So you need to, some folks will need to find what the baseline is for them and their materials. The one thing you do want to make sure is you never add additional soap. It already has a soap in it. If you do, you'll be on I Love Lucy with bubbles going everywhere out of your washing machine. So, you know, when you're testing, I wouldn't go straight for 2 cups of everything and throw it in there. That's probably too much product. So if you're at 1/4 of a cup and you don't find that it's working, maybe go to half a cup, and half a teaspoon. You know, slowly integrate it and see what works best for you, because in that scenario, it is diluted. If you're having a higher reaction, I believe Keely, it worked well on our clothes, but maybe not so much on our sheets. There's other methods you can do. You can soak those. You could do a higher concentration. I think everybody probably that's listening knows front loaders are horrible for mold. You know, but if you do have that, or you're at a laundromat, run a cycle with just the Easy Decon first, you know, to kind of take care of the machine itself before you're putting your laundry in. But there are different scenarios on using a wash machine for fabrics. Bill, do you have anything in particular on fabrics? And
I can't think of any specific fabrics that would present a particular issue. Synthetics are going to be less vulnerable to mold growth, but not totally invulnerable, because mold is constantly adapting. So just in the about 20 years that we've been in business, we've seen the change where items that previously mold didn't grow on or consume, mold is now growing on and consuming. That includes things like vinyl flooring. So they'll advertise vinyl flooring and say, oh, well, it's mold resistant. Well, it might have been, but I'm not so sure that's true anymore. So molds, a generation for mold is about 30 days. A generation for us is 30 years. They can adapt a whole lot faster than we can. And that's really what nature plans for them. That's why we really do need to be careful about developing resistant strains. We know that there's a strain, Aspergillus fumigatus, that causes aspergillosis, and it's resistant to many antimicrobials and is resistant to all but one antifungal medication. So if you get aspergillosis with that, you could have a real significant problem, because antifungals are not fun medications to take anyway. And this makes it even more difficult, because now you're down to one medication that you can possibly take. If you react to that, you're in deep trouble. We had a client who had, in his case, what happened was his shower pan failed, but it was in an area of the house where there was no structure below it where they could see that it was leaking. He worked a very difficult job for safety clean. So he would come home from work, and it was a very physical job. And so he liked to come home and take a nice long hot shower. And he had a bench built in the shower so that he could sit down and just let the water pour over him. One day he sat down on the bench and it collapsed, and that's when they found the mold. And he had already lost 80% of lung function, and that was permanent. There was no way to reverse it.
Wow. Eric, did you have anything that you wanted to say? I feel like Eric has
Just
something.
that was an observation I've made over the last 25 years, that mold is growing in places that it never grew before, making people sick in a way that it never has.
Yeah.
that's why they weaponize it.
Yeah. Well, and that's why we need to really think in terms of building science and building appropriate buildings. I'm not going to say that people in Europe don't have issues with mold, because there are people in Europe who are having the same issues we are, but they don't use drywall in Europe. Everything is masonry and plaster. And plaster is made out of limestone. It's a base pH, and mold doesn't like a base pH. Plus, there's no food source. It's crushed rock, and the only thing that it's going to feed off of is the paint. So if you paint your walls with latex paint, you're going to have the potential for mold growth, but you're not likely to get the really dangerous molds, the ones that tend to be toxin producers, because the food source is inadequate to sustain them. So they have a much, yeah.
That I got sick in Hitler's bunker in northern Germany back in 1976. And it was completely concrete. There was no wood in the bunker at all. But it was growing on cardboard boxes.
Yeah.
Had a flood and the basement armory flooded.
Yeah. Yeah. And cardboard is probably next to drywall. Cardboard is Stachybotrys's favorite food because, again, it's highly absorbent, so it holds the moisture. It's corrugated, so it can hide and there's nothing that's going to disturb it. And very often when we get positive tests of Stachybotrys in a location, it's because the house was up for sale. They stored a bunch of items in the basement so that they would have more room in the house, put it all in cardboard boxes, left it in the basement sitting on the concrete floor. They didn't look like they were problematic, but when they started to move things to get it out of the house, to get the residential inspection done for the sale, they picked all those boxes up to take them out to storage or take them out to the garage or wherever they took them. And they aerosoled the Stachybotrys. And that's when we get high readings. And it came off the bottoms of the boxes that nobody knew it was moldy until they lifted them up and then they found it underneath. And that's putting cardboard boxes on concrete floors is probably one of the biggest mistakes we make because concrete never dries. And it has capillaries in it. So if there's moisture under the basement floor or the garage floor, it's going to come up through the garage floor. And it just follows it up and it ends up getting absorbed by any materials that are porous enough to accept moisture on those concrete floors. And that's usually
really
when we
brings
find
back
it.
some memories because that's exactly what happened to me.
Yeah, yeah.
I think it's probably happened to a lot of us here. We don't realize those things. So another question here is, do you recommend soaking laundry in tap water in the washing solution, the easy decon solution, I'm assuming she means, or should you soak it in distilled water?
That's an interesting question. I don't know if Jamie wants to jump in on that. My feeling is if you, go ahead.
I was going to say, so typically if you're going to soak laundry in it, keep in mind if you have materials that have poor coloring, that it may discolor. But typically we don't recommend diluting. So if you're going to soak it, I would say you don't even necessarily need to use water, just soak it in the product itself. That is the highest concentration of the product. And so that is a lot in a liquid form. That's a lot of concentration. So I wouldn't necessarily submerge. It doesn't need to be dripping wet. It needs to be moist. So probably the easiest way to do it would be to apply the product into a spray bottle and spray down your clothing so that you're not using the highest concentration available. Keep in mind, if you do that, once you mix all three parts together, you only have an 8-hour pot life. So only mix what you're going to use that day. Most folks on this call aren't going to be mixing a full kit every day. You're just going to be using, on average at my house, a kit lasts me about 9 months. So just kind of keep that in mind, that only mix what you're going to use. You only have an 8-hour pot life. And then if you're going to use a spray bottle option, don't fill the spray bottle to the top because peroxide off gases and it expands. And so if it doesn't have room to expand, it's going to blow this, especially the 99-cent special from Walmart spray bottle. So you do have to give it room to expand. Again, these are all reasons why you never will see it on the shelf in a commercial grocery store, because there is education that goes along with using the product.
I know a lot of people are wondering why the cost is so high for the product, and
Mhm.
it's great that it lasts so long, actually. I mean, you would
Yeah.
buy something from the store for $3 and it'll last you like a week to a month, so this is gonna last you 9 months. This is
Yeah.
awesome.
And less is more with the product. I mean, if you're fogging with it, it's 2 cents a square foot. Fogging doesn't, you don't use that much product when you're fogging. Foaming is for more severe situations where you do need a remediator and you do have an active leak. That's something Keeley should be doing with her windows when they take those out, is foaming in there. Different applications are different costs involved, depending on how you apply it.
Got it. Now, is the same formulation that you mentioned for laundry, is that the same to put it together in a spray bottle to clean maybe floors or counters or walls with?
Yep. So you can do that. Again, case by case scenario. So if you're going to use it in a heavy concentration or a liquid concentration, you need to make sure that you're doing a fresh water rinse, just a damp microfiber cloth. Afterwards, first of all, it'll be slippery on your floors, and it will leave a surfactant residue, soap residue. So you'll need to get that off. If you're using it as a fog, there's usually less residue. You might see spotting on stainless steel or mirrors or picture frames, reflective material. And we always tell you to wipe down food grade surfaces. So nobody liked it when they got their mouth washed out with soap. So on your counters and stuff, you want to make sure you're wiping that down.
Awesome, thank you. Another question here is this helpful to use inside walls? I'm assuming she means to fog using Easy Decon inside walls after remediation.
Depending on, and that's a difficult question to answer in terms of remediation, because in most cases, if you're concerned about what's in the wall cavity, then the drywall's going. I'm not leaving it behind. Because if you've got visible mold growth on the front of the drywall, you've got more visible mold growth on the back of the drywall. Just because it's a dark space, mold prefers to grow in the dark. In that space, you're not going to get a lot of air exchange. So if it gets moist back there, it's going to stay moist for a longer period of time, which allows for the mold to amplify a little bit more greatly. We always remove, and I wouldn't just fog into a cavity. Because you want to be able to know that you've actually moistened wherever the mold is located. And the only way to do that is to be able to see it. It's not something you want to just fog into a space and hope for the best, because it may not actually contact the area that needs it. And we know from past history that a number of people who are highly sensitive don't need a lot of mold. I mean, I've had clients who were really, really sick, and it turned out to be something about the size of my iPhone on the back of a piece of molding in one room, and they reacted to it. I've had clients who have walked into big box stores like Home Depot, Lowe's, Kohl's, one of those, got 10 steps in, turn around, walk back out. They know there's mold in that building someplace.
I took the question a little bit differently than Bill, so I'll throw my answer in there as well. Fogging versus foaming. So fogging, we say, is typically for general disinfection. You have to have the source of the problem remediated, okay? So foaming 2x4s, the product has a mildew stat in it. And so anything ending in the word stat, I mean, it's gonna stick around a little bit longer. And so the mildew stat will still work. So if you're removing the drywall, as Bill suggests, and you're foaming down your 2x4s, you can put your new drywall up without cleaning those 2x4s because it will continue to work. So same in an attic or a crawl space, if you can foam it and leave it, I would recommend that. Some people like to encapsulate after they decontaminate. So in those instances, you would have to remove the foam if you're going to encapsulate. But that's how I kind of took the question. Bill, do you have anything to add to that part?
Well, and we encapsulate, but because we use Easy Decon first, we're not actually encapsulating the mold. So encapsulation doesn't really apply.
Mm-hmm.
We've actually killed it. Therefore, I'm actually putting a preventive coating of acrylic on that surface, which is going to help the wood be less absorbent for any moisture that's in the space. So if you're getting high humidity levels, or you're getting big temperature differentials and you're getting condensation in those spaces, it's not going to be as readily absorbed by the structural elements. And that acts as a nice preventive. The other thing is it's a mechanical barrier. The mold will land on that, but it can't grow because it can't get through to get to the food.
Awesome, thank you. Here's a interesting question. Why isn't the military using this in their military, in their moldy barracks? If the military was the first to basically study and create this solution?
So I can take that one on because I deal with the military every day. Because it's far cheaper to pay a soldier who's doing nothing to clean the bathroom that's been moldy for years, and they do that with bleach. So unfortunately, we still use our soldiers as janitorial service when we need to. And so it's very, very hard. We have hit every soldier who has posted on social media, and their mother has gone bonkers with seeing all that mold. We have talked to all those generals on those bases, and they still will not do it. Now they'll use it for weapons of mass destruction, but they won't use it to clean their own barracks. It's unfortunate.
Yeah, the other thing is that you have to realize that some base housing is not actually owned by the military.
Mm-hmm.
It's owned by private companies, and then they rent those facilities, and it's the private company that doesn't want to spend any money.
They didn't budget it into their fee.
Yeah,
Mhm.
we again sacrifice efficacy on the altar of efficiency.
Mhm.
And for major companies or for venture capitalists, the idea is make money, not spend money. And so they're more than willing to let those soldiers live in horrible conditions because they really don't care. Their house doesn't look like that.
Well, I'd really like to give a little shout out to my commanding officer back in 1976, because when he saw how sick we were getting, he was going to evacuate the entire garrison.
Good for him.
Yeah, for sure.
He probably would have gotten
That's
overruled by somebody.
Yeah.
I actually had the New York State Police ask me why this hasn't been adopted by a number of organizations for a variety of things, because I was working with their dive teams, because we can use Easy Decon to decontaminate the dive teams. When they go into the water, they're likely to be exposed to biological threats or chemical threats. So when they come out, they can be foamed down with Easy Decon and then just rinsed, because it's inherently biodegradable. So it's not going to be a problem in the water source. And I told them it's inertia. It's nobody anymore wants to make a decision that changes what's being done, because if something goes wrong, they're going to get blamed. And so rather than make that decision and change direction, they'll continue to use what they're using.
Wow. Thank you so much for that. Great question, by the way. That really sprouted some great answers. We have another question here. What is the recommended application method on surface mold? I'm assuming surface growing mold, anything that you can see.
Well, you can apply it as a spray, you can apply it as a fog, and you can foam it. I mean, any of those, it depends on the surface, depends on what the material is. There are some construction materials that I would recommend removal rather than treating surfaces. So if you get something like oriented strand board, OSB, looks like plywood, but it's flakes glued together, big flakes glued together. In many cases, the recommendation there is just remove it and replace it, because what happens is if the moisture gets into that, it gets in the various layers and goes into the matrix of the wood, because capillaries will allow the moisture to expand in the area it covers, and that allows it to more readily evaporate. But on OSB, it can only go as far as the edge of the flake, which means it then goes into the matrix of the wood. And so you've got mold growth in layers inside that, all of which can pose a problem later. So that's why in construction failures, which we do a lot of work in construction failures, usually it's remove the OSB and replace it.
Got it. Thank you so much. Can this also be used for carpet and for pipes in a home?
So yes and yes. Pipes, you need to know the integrity of your home. So the two things that we know the Easy Decon can harm are copper. It's an oxidizer. It'll chew away at copper. So if you have copper plumbing, I would not recommend it. So that's older homes, 70s. It will also, just since I'm on the subject of things that it can harm, fine wool rugs. So we're talking $30,000 wool rugs, not something you bought at TJ Maxx. Wool, I don't know why. I don't know, Bill, maybe if you know why, but something about the real fresh wool hair, it has a reaction to. That was before my time with the company, but that's always one that's been pushed down my throat. Not fine wool, not fine wool. Do you know on that one, Bill?
I don't know for sure, but I think that it makes sense because it's a natural fiber, which means it's organic matter. And one of the things it could do is reduce that down to start breaking the bonds that are keeping it together. I wouldn't, if I had a oriental carpet or something like that, I would say don't do it. Send that out and have it cleaned. A carpet cleaner or a dry cleaner is going to tell you that they can't take care of the mold because that's not what they're licensed to take care of. But in most instances, you could do it with a regular carpet cleaner. And it has been used in carpet cleaners as the detergent to clean carpets. You do have to consider color fastness, again, because the hydrogen peroxide is at 7.9%, so it's pretty potent. And when you add the diacetyl, it produces
Peracetic acid?
Peracetic acid, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So you'd have to be concerned about that. The label says mix all three components. Sometimes you have to use discretion, and depending on what you're working with, you might be able to get away with 2 out of the 3 if there's not a big concern for the mycotoxins. The toxins, you really need the diacetyl in there because that adds the extra kick that it needs to break the chemical bonds. So that's why that's why it's so critical. Same thing with meth labs. If you use it in a meth lab, you've got to have that part 3 because the hydrogen peroxide by itself can't do it. And the surfactant isn't sufficient to do it. That's not really what the surfactant's designed for.
That's a whole nother podcast though.
That's true.
So Bill, you mentioned utilizing this solution to foam down divers and also firefighters. So I'm assuming this is safe to be handled and you don't necessarily need to wear gloves or anything if you're going to be utilizing
if you're going to be working with it, you want to wear at least nitrile gloves because if you do get a burn from the hydrogen peroxide or from the additional diacetyl that's in it, it's going to be a lot like a mild sunburn, but it will irritate your skin if it's on there for a long enough period of time. We remediated the largest winery in the Northeast up in Rhode Island, and the guys in that instance were foaming, and because it was a high ceiling, the foam was getting up there, and then as they were going through, it would fall on them and or fall on the hood on their Tyvek suits. They came out with a lot of blonde hair, let's put it that way, and they had a mild sunburn for a day or so, but that was the extent of it. And we know that people have been exposed for longer periods of time and had no significant reaction. But I wouldn't discount the idea that somebody could have a reaction. So you do want to wear PPE. Not necessarily when you're doing laundry. You can mix it together and put it into your laundry machine without any problem. But if you're going to be doing anything where you might have to inhale and you're spraying, you have to keep in mind that spray doesn't stay it doesn't just go in one direction. It starts to fill the space. So you do want to be cautious. And you wouldn't particularly want to get a load of this in your eyes or anything like that. So always consider wearing PPE if you're doing something where you're treating a larger area, just to be on the safe side. I wouldn't want somebody to end up getting hurt.
Yeah, and
Thank
when you're fogging, the micron size is so small. This is with any disinfectant. That fogging, you can get that micron size so small that it can be a lung irritant. So you do want a respirator in those instances. And PPE per the power keeps going on and off here, so I apologize for those that can see us. And PPE is per the EPA label is gloves, long sleeves, glasses, and some sort of respirator.
Fantastic. One question, which, how long until the public can buy this, and when will the price be lowered?
So with an EPA registered product, there's lots of hands in the pie, and that's unfortunate, but that's what causes the price to go up. Validation testing, you have to pay. We have to validate it with our own lab, then the EPA has to validate it with their lab, which we have to pay for, and then the EPA gets a portion of all your sales. So there's lots of components to the price, unfortunately, that do not make it as economical. We have been selling to the exposing mold community. We just want to talk to you first. So if you go on, I don't know if it's on your website or your login portion, but that'll generate an email to me directly, so that we can talk to you and walk you through and work with you. We don't want to just send you product and then not hear back, because we want to make sure, since everybody's reaction is a little bit different, everybody's sensitivity is a little bit different, we want to work with you on that. So you can order it if you'd like. Just go on, and Alicia, you should probably tell them where that is, because I don't know, but.
Sure, yeah. So all of our members, everyone who has joined here today, and also others who are on our general audience, are able to make an inquiry, sending an email to info@exposingmold.org. Let us know you're interested in the Easy Decon DF200 solution, and we will then connect you with our wonderful, lovely Jamie here, who will walk you through ordering and provide you all the information that you need to start using this solution. We really wanted to find the best products on the market for people who are hypersensitive like us. And we just did a massive inquiry of so many different companies, and we started just testing a lot of this stuff out for ourselves. And so Intelagard's Easy Decon DF200 was really helpful for us. Again, it's not 100% solution, but at least it's something that it's going to make, for example, our clothes a little bit more tolerable for us and allow us to not have these intense reactions when we encounter contaminated clothing or certain things in our home. So thank you so much for being so graceful, Jamie, and so open, and same with you, Bill, and offering your time to us today and always to help our community. We really do appreciate it. And again, if anyone is interested in purchasing that product, please send an email to info@exposingmold.org, and we will get that over to you. Thank you both so much. We appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. And we have one of our members saying thank you so much as well. We'll see you guys next time.
All right.
All right,
Bye-bye.
take care.
Bye.
Bye.